Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for bearing with us. I am Cory Epstein. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the communications director here at Transportation Alternatives here in New York City. I live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I am coming at you live from the TA office in Lower Manhattan, where I just found a sign to put over my shoulder to make our very plain conference room a little bit more festive for the occasion for the conference. Before joining TA, I was the spokesperson for City Bike, the bike share network here in New York City. So I've worked on issues of communications and what is going on our streets for a while now. I'm very happy to be here moderating this panel, which is titled Words Kill, Words Matter, Vision Zero in Marketing and the Media. The topic is something that's inescapable for me at work. It comes up whenever I hear of another crash and when I hold my breath, fearing how the media could victim blame the deceased or normalize traffic violence. Or in my free time, it's when I'm bombarded with car ads, PSAs. It's really everywhere, and I'm sure many of you can relate. We have three experts from across the country who are going to guide us in an examination of our work for safe streets, how it's advanced and set back by the media. We're going to see what works, what doesn't work, what inspires, and what makes us want to throw our phone or TV out of the window. Each panelist is going to present, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. Please use the chat, which should be open now. Please use the chat to ask any questions you want, so we can, and we'll save them, and we can ask them at the end of the presentation, at the end of the panel. Also use the chat liberally throughout. There is a introduction question that my colleague Alicia shared. Please share where you're from. There's also a prompt to get the conversation going, but use the chat liberally. You can give a +1 if you agree with something. You can give feedback, comment, thoughts, anything. Let's get the conversation going in there. But before we hear from our panelists, I want to invite another expert, Lauren Pine, to share her story and to do a brief introduction on the topic. Lauren is a crash survivor, a registered nurse, hip amputee, and advocate with Families for Safe Streets. She is one of the many who's affected by misrepresentations of a crash in the media and in police reports, and she shares how much this issue has affected her and why this issue should really matter to everyone. So I'm very pleased and honored to turn over the floor to Lauren for her introduction.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much. It means a lot to me as a crash survivor to be in this conference with everyone having a similar view on taking action for change, for stronger safety laws and public health and traffic related things. I live in New York City, and I'm now retired due to disability. I'm a licensed registered nurse. And one night I was crossing the street, and the next thing I knew, it was November 20th, 2017. And I came out of a 3-day medically induced coma with a foggy memory and one leg. Being a nurse and being quite sedated, I told myself everything was going to be okay somehow. I did remember being struck by the massive and proverbial Mack truck. I had been awake throughout the crash, all the way to my arriving at Bellevue. My memory of the crash in my mind was of crossing the street at the walk signal with my bicycle. But the headlines the next few days and the live news broadcasts screamed, "Truck struck, quote, cyclist going wrong way," unquote. The thought that I could have been solely responsible for so much needed emergency assistance was overwhelming. I had been an active cyclist in New York City for almost 20 years, and I had so far never had anything like this happen. I remember also finding out that the NYPD detective did not go to the scene and took the same information that the news media had garnered, which was from a bystander saying that I had gone the wrong way. This had not been checked with anyone else, and no one had asked me. Only because I was willing to find the strength from my hospital bed to protest was the police report changed. I remember on particular days sobbing inconsolably. It affected my whole recovery, from my mental stability and the will to go on, to my fundraising, thinking everyone thought I might have been going the wrong way, even though that should never matter. But as being the one that was responsible for it, I felt horrible, and I thought maybe my memory was false. This will likely also haunt me once the legal process ensues. Fortunately, I saw a video of the crash and was able to maintain my position that I was indeed in the crosswalk with the light when the driver made the right turn into me without slowing down. But if I were a juror and had read about a similar incident and there were no other voices or videos present to strongly state otherwise, it would be different for me to decide what the jury award should be in that case. This can affect further laws to protect all of our legal rights, those that we've been discussing today, and further settlements to aid victims, survivors, and their families regarding crashes. As another speaker mentioned in a previous session today, there is so much value in seeing this as a complex problem and not going into devices, us versus them, that driver, this cyclist polarities. I like that we can examine it from many perspectives. I hope that we will all see the benefits of strategies for more accurate reporting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Lauren. Thank you for opening up this conversation. It's extremely powerful, and I really appreciate you and Families for Safe Streets members who always are willing to share their stories, and you've really helped ground this conversation. We're going to move now to our panelists, who are also going to expand a lot upon what you shared, but also examine Vision Zero and safe streets from different angles in the media. And we have someone joining us from the West Coast, John Yee, to share a perspective on, from his perspective, what it's like leading a grassroots movement for safe streets in Los Angeles. John is the executive director at Los Angeles Walks. Their mission is to activate and mobilize historically disinvested communities in Los Angeles to transform their streets into safe, accessible, and vibrant environments for people who walk. John has a very diverse background in community organizing. He's worked on issues from tobacco control to disability, health, and education. I'm very pleased to welcome John to our conversation now to advance this conversation and get our panel started on this topic of words kill, words matter, Vision Zero, marketing in the media. John.
Great, thank you, Cory, and thank you, Lauren, for sharing your story. We actually have Families for Safe Streets here in Southern California. And I think family is the most apt word to put there. It's not family you want to be a part of, but it's a family no less. So really, thank you for opening. So yeah, hi everyone, my name is John Yee. I am the executive director for Los Angeles Walks. We're a pedestrian advocacy nonprofit here in Los Angeles. Just real briefly, this is sort of our belief, our mission statement succinctly put into one sentence. We believe that a walkable LA is a just LA. I love sharing this because it shows that it's beyond just infrastructure, right? It's not just about concrete and cement. It's about communities, it's about well-being, it's about equity, racial justice. And so I always like to begin my presentations with this. I'm gonna skip this slide, it's a little data heavy. And so today we're talking about words, right? We're talking about the meaning of words and how words used. And so I kind of took a different tact for my assignment, and I'm actually really looking forward to seeing my other fellow panelists talk about word usage in media, but I kind of wanted to start looking inwardly and looking at words we use within the work that we do. You know, we're all in a conference right now, so clearly we're part of some movement, right? And so the first question I want to tackle is, what do we call this movement that we're in? The second question is, what do we call our policies? You know, what do we call, or what do we put to word? What do you put to name the things we espouse that would push this movement further? And finally, third, you know, if we were in a room, we can kind of look around at each other, but what do we call each other in this space as advocates, as organizers, as victims? What do we call ourselves? So these are the three questions I want to tackle. And I think that is the operative word. As a good community organizer, my job is not to give you the answer, right? I don't think any community organizer, that is their job. I think as a good community organizer, our job is to work with you to get to your answer. And so that's kind of what I want to do today. And so a lot of what I'm sharing today is my perspective being a community organizer in this space. So let's begin with this. Who is this guy? Why am I talking about words and language in this work? So let me give a little brief introduction about myself. Again, my name is John. I'm a community organizer. I'm also a child of an immigrant. So words mean a lot to me, especially when you navigate different spaces and different languages. And what is the words you choose to use in that space? I'm a student of 4 languages. I'm a heritage Korean speaker, meaning I spoke Korean. That was my first language, which I grew up learning at home in the States. English is a second language that I learned once I started going to school. I actually got my master's and my undergrad degree in Russian, so I speak Russian as well. And my 4th language is I'm studying Spanish, because a lot of the work that we do right now is with Spanish speakers. So in a way, I like to say I know languages, I enjoy languages, and so I'm really looking forward to exploring this topic with y'all. And finally, the last thing is, before doing this work in transportation, I did a lot of work in disability work. I did a lot of work in tobacco control and education. And so for me, it's been really interesting to see the words that we use within this movement and the words that have been used in some of these other spaces, these other advocacy worlds. So the first question is this: what do we call our movement? And so this is when I really ask y'all to be generous about adding into the chat box what it is that you think your movement is called. Because I've heard a lot of different terms: safe streets movement, active transportation movement, public transit advocacy, mobility justice, bike ped advocacy, traffic safety. And so there's a lot of words that we use to call our movement, right? And it is movements. But what is it that actually encompasses all of this? I think that is a challenge that I from the beginning when I started this work, that I continually see. Cory, I see, right? Bike, public transit, safe streets advocacy is usually how it summarizes exactly. So I'm glad I got some of those right. But as you can, I'm going to give you a few examples that this idea of what we call a movement is really interpreted differently by different parties. This came out in the news as recently. There is a safe streets unit in the Beverly Hills Police Department that actually pulls people for jaywalking, for crossing the street, for creating a nuisance, for just existing in the public space. And as a result, almost 100% of the people they arrested were Black. 99% was Black, 1 was Latino male. And so this is sort of how the city of Beverly Hills considers safe streets, right? Policing people, giving people tickets for quote unquote jaywalking. Another example I want to show here is arrested mobility. I love that. Equity in public spaces. These are some great examples. Thank you. Our own local agency here, Livable Streets, is sort of the mini tagline under the logo, LA Department of Transportation. So in this context, it's very much about infrastructure, about design, about concrete. Another way, sometimes movements are then separated amongst themselves. And in Los Angeles, we have the Bicycle Coalition. They do bike advocacy. You have LA Walks, us, we do pedestrian advocacy. You have groups like ACT LA, they do public transit advocacy. And for those in Los Angeles, I'm sure I missed a lot of amazing groups, so I apologize, but this is just to really put it succinctly. But yeah, even amongst our movement, we have different words we use for different kinds of actors. Some of us look at this work as purely a safety issue. So especially when it comes to our women and when it comes to our friends with disabilities, when it comes to navigating these spaces, some of the priorities for them is safety. So that can be what your movement's about. And as we saw earlier today from the presentation from Lauren, sometimes you are part of this movement not because you want to, you're forced to be in this movement. And so what do we call that? Or sometimes you're just an angry parent who cannot stand the drop-off time when kids are just quite getting to school. And so that could be your issue. That could be your movement. And so the question is, what do you call a movement? What are the words we put to this that encompasses so many, but yet is unrealized by most? And what I mean by this is coming from tobacco, education, disability advocacy, worlds where it's very well established. I think transportation is not quite there yet. I don't think people really see themselves as a part of a larger movement. Oftentimes it's just an issue with your block, with your street, with your city. And so what do we call this movement, right? That encompasses so many, but is unrealized by a lot. Not the folks on this call. I feel like everyone on this call knows that we're part of a larger movement, but just the larger public. And so again, I don't have the answer for you, but I can tell you how we answer that question at Los Angeles Walks. We stay rooted in our communities who we serve and profess to serve. And so we make sure our words reflect their needs and their desires. And so what I mean by that is, I want to give you an example. We have a campaign called Calles Seguras Familias Sanas, in which we work with community members in Wilmington. This logo, the name, and everything from the ground up was created by the community. They decided on everything from the colors to the images to the name. And so for them, they connected safe streets with families, because a lot of the people that we worked with were parents with kids. And so for them, safe streets was about family health, family safety. And so this is the word that we use. This is the emblem and logo that we use in our campaign, and we ran with it. So again, what you want to call your movement, I don't know what we call our global movement, but what I can tell you is you stay rooted in your communities and you use the words that reflect them and their needs and let them decide. So the second question, what do we call our policies? Again, put into the chat if you have any other suggestions outside of this, but Vision Zero, I hear a lot. Traffic mitigation, we hear a lot. Complete streets, we hear a lot. And this is one area that I think is the most troublesome when it comes to translating these things to the community. As a community organizer, this is something that I've noticed. An example I want to give is actually Vision Zero. What does it mean? I know we're in the Vision Zero conference, so this by no means is a critique on the organizers, but Vision Zero oftentimes does not mean anything outside of the people in the work that we do. You have to explain what Vision Zero actually means. And to give you a deeper understanding, I kind of pulled out Vision Zero in different languages. So in Spanish, Visión Cero, which it translates from vision to zero almost exactly. In Korean, it's actually not even translated, it's transliterated, which means Pijon Zero. So as a Korean person reading this I pulled this out of a flyer, you would not know what Vision Zero means just by the word itself. Russian does a better job. Theirs is Nor Smertei, which means 0 deaths. And so even in different languages, different words is used to describe this policy, this sort of global approach to this work. And I think it's important to take note of this, especially if you're organizing in communities of color in different cultures and different kinds of settings, because you have to understand what it is you're saying and is it getting across. Because sometimes in a lot of our work, we don't talk about Vision Zero. I rarely bring it up actually in our community organizing work, because for our community, it's not about this larger global policy. For them, it's about basic city services. Our street is illegal dumping being cleared on the sidewalk so I can walk. Is the bus service coming on time so I can actually take the bus and get to where I need to get to? And so again, I go back to the answer, which is we stay rooted in our communities who we serve and profess. And so the words that we use, the language that we use when we do the work reflects the needs of the community. So very rarely actually will you see Los Angeles walks in a community work, again, using the word Vision Zero or complete streets. Oftentimes we're talking about bus services. We're talking about illegal dumping, as I mentioned before. So again, it goes back to being rooted in the community that you serve and using their languages. And finally, the third question is, what do we call each other? Right? And words that we've used is active transportation advocates, pedestrians or Angelenos who walk, bicyclists, Angelenos who bike, train riders, non-commuting commuters that are non-car commuters, even street vendors. These are people that occupy our public spaces. And so you have disability advocates. We have our sisters and brothers from the disability world that advocate for flatter sidewalks. On the bottom right is a picture of a vigil we had with some parents, with a parent who lost both their children to car crash. And so sometimes you're an angry parent, you're a pissed off parent to put it more succinctly. We have our bus rider advocates, the bus rider unions. We have the biker bras. I just Googled this image, so please don't send me hate mail for this. And then we have the professional advocates versus the community. I think as advocates in this space, sometimes there's a bifurcation of the community versus the advocates. Or is it one or is it separate? So I think there's a lot of different classifications we see ourselves, we call ourselves in this work. And I think this is just, again, symptomatic of how big our work is, and yet how many different kinds of players are in this space. And so what do we call each other? And so my answer to you is, how do we call ourselves in this work? Again, we stay rooted in our communities. Doing this work, our communities quickly realized that in Los Angeles, at least, Safe Street advocacy was being able to navigate city systems, secure resources, and bring those resources to your community. And so in a way, we started calling our community advocates promotoras. We actually have a whole training program which we certify promotoras. But for some of y'all in the public health world might see this term, might be familiar with this term. But it's the idea that it is the communities that know best what they need and know how to navigate culturally and linguistically the best, not city government, not professional organizers like myself, or nonprofits. And so again, what are the words we use? They're not volunteers. They're not parents who are doing, doing work for Los Angeles Walks. They're actual promotoras that we call them. We pay them and compensate them for doing the organizing work. So again, the words that we use must reflect the needs and the desires of the communities that we work with. And so I'll leave with this sort of to conclude. So what is to be done? I know I kind of threw a lot at you, but if you are doing community work, if you're doing community organizing, I have just 3 tips for you to move on from this. First is stay rooted in the community and let the community dictate your language. I think this is something that I've been consistently sharing for all 3 points. Second is build coalitions and partnerships. I think this is critical. This act alone will diversify your vocabulary. It diversifies our vocabulary. And so the more coalition and partnerships you build, the more of that struggle you do, the more of those tough conversations you have, and the more better you can speak and more inclusive you become. So build partnerships. And finally, money, money, money. A movement takes money at the end of the day. This does not happen for free. And so we have to invest in those partnerships, invest in that mutual language. And whether it's applying for grants with different organizations, whether it's seeding money to smaller nonprofits or giving money to your community members to do the organizing work, start investing money into that and start adopting those languages, learning those languages and those words to better make use of your campaigns. So with that, I'm just going to conclude with this last quote I love. This is by El Peatonito. He was one of our fellows at Los Angeles Walks. He does a lot of amazing pedestrian theater and advocacy on the streets. But he says, the pedestrian is nobody in the city. She or he has been forgotten by authorities and our own citizenry. The curious and paradoxical thing is that we are all pedestrians at some point. As such, we have forgotten ourselves. So again, the word is pedestrian. We are all pedestrians. And so I think the more we hone in on that, the more we take ownership of that word, the more I think we realize we are all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was great. And I found I really identifying with a lot of what you said and having a bunch of aha moments and rethinking the language I use, because language is really key to what I do as the communications director at TA every single day. On the topic of language, someone else who works with words every single day is Kia Wilson. Kia is the senior editor, and Kia is the senior editor and the primary daily reporter for Streets Blog USA. If you're on this call now, there's a good chance you have read or been interviewed for an article that Kia has worked on. Kia lives in St. Louis, and she will be going in a different direction in her next panel, her next presentation. She's going to look at government PSAs and how they shape the view of safe streets. One final thing before Kia's portion, don't forget to ask questions in the chat, because at the end we will have time for questions and we'll have time to do more digesting and examining of what we've presented today. So for the second out of 3 panels, we have Kia Wilson.
Hey everyone, while I'm sharing my screen, I just want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Lauren for sharing your story at the top of the talk. I think stories like that are a huge part of why I do what I do and why a lot of us do what we do. And your vulnerability and your honesty is what humanizes this movement, which is something we're in sore need of. And big thanks to John for talking about words that can save lives and build movements. I'm actually going to be talking more about, I'm on the wrong slide here, words that kill, because as Cory mentioned, I am an advocacy journalist covering the movement to end car dependency in America. So one of my most frequent beats, if you will, is dismantling the language of powerful people who talk about traffic violence in good and bad ways, unfortunately, mostly in bad ways. So we're going to dive right into it here and start way back at the beginning. So I argue basically that anti-Vision Zero messaging is the cornerstone of our national traffic violence crisis. One of the very first things that automotive lobbyists did following the invention of the Model T and the popularization of the automobile was to place PSAs in newspapers across America, basically popularizing, and in this case, inventing terms like jaywalking, which were very racist and also very effective at changing the way that the public thought about who is responsible for traffic deaths and what is reasonable about what should be done in order to prevent traffic deaths. In this case, not very much, just scolding people to stay out of the road. And over time, those sorts of messages, while they weren't accepted at first, filtered into our general culture and began to impact the way that people in power at all levels of government started to think and talk about this stuff. And when I say all levels of government, I mean all levels of government. Just to give one particularly naked example of what I mean, at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, President Trump was quoted on record, wrote an article about it, saying, and you look at automobile accidents, his word, not mine, which are far greater than any number of potential COVID-19 deaths we're talking about. And that doesn't mean that we're going to tell everyone no more driving of cars. We have to do things to get our country open. So this is pretty gross, but it is not very different than the way that we see a lot of politicians and agencies in more subtle and implicit ways frame the way that we talk about traffic violence and what can be done to end it and what it is worth doing in order to end it. Lest you think that this is just like a relic of early pandemic days, here's one quick one from a think tank out of Michigan in June of 2021 that has a pretty upsetting quote that COVID-19 is a level of risk we're obviously comfortable with taking since it is similar to what we face in our regular commutes. I don't know that we are obviously comfortable taking that. I don't think that we all as a society agree on that. Certainly no one on this call does, but it is a pervasive attitude that we need to dismantle wherever we see it. So another place where this comes up, this kind of thinking comes up is within our DOTs. And just to give you a sort of taste of the way that this conversation is going very, very recently, I thought we would take a look at some of my friend Don Kostelek, who's an advocate and planner in Boise, Idaho, what he's been collecting on his Twitter. He's a great follow if you haven't followed him before, simply because Don is one of the most prolific collector of bad pedestrian safety PSAs that I have ever seen in my life. And he's been collecting things just in the last week, like this one on the left. For our low vision folks, I'm going to do my best to describe stuff. So please, hit up in the chat if I'm not saying something well enough and fill in my blanks. But it's a picture of a traffic controller box that says, "Let's get there safely" in bright colors. But unfortunately, they didn't take the time to actually go inside of the traffic safety box and, for instance, increase the crosswalk signal timing to give people more time to get across the street safely. I also wanted to highlight this one that he found, I believe in LA, that says, "We wait for walk signal," and then in Spanish, "Esperamos la walk signal." And just wanted to underscore, because John did such a beautiful job of talking about how we need to be inclusive of people who have different native languages, that we also need to dismantle PSAs in different native languages. Utah DOT also got some pushback this week. They actually apologized for these two ads, which is exciting, if a little bit too rare. The one on the left depicts a man with headphones on, and it says "walk focused." Bet you don't normally think about distracted walking, but it's a thing. There's a lot of research out there that shows that distracted walking is actually not a thing, at least at the level of attention that it tends to get in pedestrian safety PSAs. Dr. Kelsey Ralph had a really, really fantastic research paper a few years ago that showed that the high estimate of the number of fatal pedestrian and vehicle crashes that involve distraction would be 5 to 10%, and that might even be an overestimate because walkers are not alive to tell their side of the story. I also thought that this one on the right deserved a little bit of a shout out. It says "walk single file when in groups," and it has pictures of what seem to be children with backpacks and women with purses and people with headphones walking on a sidewalk, because as everyone knows, if you're just in a conga line on the sidewalk, if a driver jumps the curb, you'll be fine. That's sarcasm, to be clear. And it's not just state and local DOTs that are making these mistakes. So we wrote a 2-part article series last year about NHTSA's October Pedestrian Safety Month, and it was kind of a doozy, so it needed a lot of takedown. You see a lot of the same myths that we see all the time in my field about distraction, about there being equal responsibility between pedestrians and drivers to prevent traffic violence. We'll talk a little bit about why equal is absolutely not the word we should be using when we talk about this stuff later on in the talk. We also have an old chestnut, safety starts with me, with a picture of two stick-figure children, because children, as we know, are fantastic at keeping themselves safe. I've got some nieces and nephews and who are toddlers who are pretty good object lessons otherwise. And then increase your safety, carry a flashlight, and wear reflective gear in the dark to make yourself more visible to motorists from greater distances. So this is not words that kill, but it is words that de-emphasizes practices that save lives. That's one thing that I think we're going to return to a few times as we go through these, because notice we're not talking about, for instance, headlight standards that studies have shown. If we had better headlight standards on cars, we could save 25% of pedestrians involved in nighttime crashes. We're not talking about adding streetlights. We're talking about putting the emphasis on walkers to do all of the work. I wanted to shout out this year's Federal Pedestrian Safety Month as well, because it is better, but not great still. To their credit, this year, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, put out a video that you'll see to the right that gives drivers some handy tips on how to not kill people, which include looking at them with their eyes when they're in crosswalks. But it is buried way far down the page. It is below a similar video directed specifically at pedestrians, which talks about reflective clothing and gives tips on how to walk on a street with no sidewalk as safely as possible. And again, one thing I want to emphasize on this, you'll probably notice that there have been a lot of stick figure, like bathroom symbol guys and girls and non-binary people, who knows? And that in and of itself, I think, is something that is deserving of some censure, because it deracializes and degenders the entire pedestrian safety epidemic, right? And we know, we have a lot of stats that Indigenous communities, Black communities, other communities of color, particularly men, are the ones who are dying in these crashes. And there's systemic reasons why that never get discussed when we just slap a little guy with a circle for a head on these videos. So to just sort of boil it down to a few takeaways, the thing I'm trying to emphasize here is that any effort that we make as advocates to achieve Vision Zero is working against a whole lot of stuff, an enormous amount of government-sanctioned messaging that either overtly or tacitly normalizes preventable mass death in a whole bunch of ways. One we talked about already is treating traffic fatalities as the price we all willingly pay as a society, which we do not all willingly pay. Here's another political sitting senator, it's political ghoul, who is promulgating that message. Another one that I struggle with a lot is treating safety as, quote unquote, a shared responsibility between walkers. That should be one of your red flag words, because walkers do not have the power to kill, and drivers do, with the flex of an ankle. This is a advocate made PSA that I think is really fantastic, again, from my friend Don Kostelek. That just sort of investigates physically why it is not possible for this to be a shared responsibility, because one person in this exchange has a weaponizable tool and another person is a child sitting on the side of the road. Okay, this is a little bit more nuanced and we can talk about it in the Q&A, but a thing that I struggled with as I was putting this through is this idea that we can educate drivers into being perfect and that it's easy, which we can't. I'm not saying there's no place for PSAs in this world. I would much rather a safety PSA be directed towards a driver than a pedestrian, but there are a lot of messages out there that say, we're about to drive, TTYL, it's simple to stop texting, or slow down, it's road safety, not rocket science. And when we put that message out and say that it's so simple for drivers to stop, we're ignoring all the ways that road design induces speeding. We're ignoring all the ways that we have designed technology to create cell phone addiction that makes it really, really hard to put down the phone behind the wheel. We're ignoring the whole systems approach that we need to put forward. So I'm not anti-education campaigns. I'm anti-education campaigns that erase the full safe system that we need in order to make education the cherry on top. You might say this is an example of that, but again, we can talk about it in the Q&A. A red flag for me is when an ad obscures the real concrete human costs of traffic violence and tends to make safe roads feel like a should rather than a must. So this ad on the left, neither of these ads are from the United States. This one's from Ireland. And, you know, trigger warning for this description, feel free to mute me for the next 5 seconds if you want, but it actually depicts a driver who's speeding, who flips over a wall and kills an entire classroom full of children. And it's extremely graphic, it's not bloody, but it basically what they're saying is, I think like about a classroom worth of children die on Ireland's roads every year. In the US, it's 800 kids, by the way. I think last year was 840. So we can talk a little bit about whether PSAs should be more graphic, but I think one thing that is really important is that we talk very, very honestly about the human cost of these things. We get advocates like Lauren to be centered, and we don't erase it under cartoons, frankly. The other one, I believe, is from Pakistan and kind of speaks for itself. It's a picture of a set of keys arranged to look like a gun, and it says takes one life every 25 seconds. I wanted to give another example of some slightly better PSAs, or at least one that's evolved. So this image of a young lady with a tire track on her face has been around since at least 2013. It's been used by so many DOTs around the country. A lot of these PSAs tend to repeat themselves. Originally, Texas put out one that said, don't be caught dead wearing black. When it's dark, wear something bright or reflective. We, as you can probably see, the problems with that by now. And then it was revised to be directed at a driver, and it says some mistakes you can't take back, stop for pedestrians at crosswalks. I say that that's better rather than good for a simple reason that I'm gonna put on its own slide because I think it's important, which is that, you know, at the end of the day, pro Vision Zero messaging alone won't end our national traffic violence crisis, right? At the end of the day, we need engineering, evaluation, engagement, and anti-racist enforcement. We can talk about what that means much more than we need education. We need stuff to back this stuff up. But that said, it is still critical to denormalize anti-Vision Zero language whenever you see it, and to use that as a conversation, as a foundation and a launching pad to talk about more substantive, long-lasting change. And we need to confront that messaging everywhere. I've just given a tiny slice of government messaging, but I've also been doing some work with our next presenter, Tom, who I'm going to alley to in a second, on automotive advertising specifically. These are some highlights or lowlights from our America's Most Toxic Car Ad contest that we have going on right now at Streets Blog. You'll see a little shortened link at the bottom, where we are going deep into the ways that car culture, automotive advertisers specifically, are normalizing aggressive driving, mass death, and, you know, all these terrible things we've been talking about today. So that's what I've got for you. I have a few more resources of like things I've talked about in more depth at bit.ly/VZC 2021 for Vision Zero cities. So I'm going to give it on to Tom. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Kia, Tom, I will let you jump in a second, but I need to give you a proper introduction, like all the other panelists have gotten. Kia, that was awesome. I'm really glad that you brought to light, you know, everything that's lost when you erase gender, race, history, heritage from sort of this messaging, and how traffic violence impacts people of different backgrounds, especially Black and Indigenous people, more directly. And I also really am thinking about what you said about education being sort of the cherry on top, but really looking at a safe systems approach, because I know in a previous panel there was a lot of talk about enforcement education and versus safe systems approach. So that was a great connecting point. Our final panelist, as Kia mentioned, is Tom. Tom Flood. He lives outside of Toronto and is a principal at Rovello Creative. He has a background in advertising, and you may have seen him on Twitter. He makes lots of videos, including two about our new 25 by 25 campaign here at Transportation Alternatives. They're always very powerful and help advance the idea of safe and livable streets. And he's going to talk more about this. And using his advertising background to talk about how we advance and maybe not advance our work for Vision Zero and safe streets and in car ads. So Tom, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Awesome.
Oh, and
Thank you.
one more thing, do not forget to ask questions. Do not forget to ask questions in the chat. I love the conversation that's been started. Okay, now Tom, it's all yours.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much to everybody, and thanks so much to TransAlt for hosting this conference and this session. It's truly an honor to be speaking next to so many incredible people. So thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm just going to very briefly touch on communications from kind of a marketing perspective, which is the world I come from. I ended up in this space very randomly. You know, I don't come from an advocacy background or a transportation background. The light bulb really didn't go off for me till a little bit later in life, when I took my kids out to daycare and school for the first time on their bikes. And at that point it was very clear, seeing the absurdity and the imbalance of those in car versus those outside of the car was striking, no pun intended there. And once you see it, it's really, really hard to turn away. So we know how in the mainstream communicating safety for those outside the car hasn't been that great, as we've already heard a little bit here. Essentially, it's been also up against a campaign to really dehumanize and essentially, you know, vilify people outside of the car, and that's really built a narrative in the mainstream consciousness that really kind of shifts and shapes how we see people who aren't driving. So, for example, those on bicycles. You know, you're not just a person, you're either a handful of stereotypes. You're a lycra-clad road warrior, you're a militant anti-car radical, you're an urban elitist. You know, pick your pejorative poison that's been branded into us for the last 100 years and hyper accelerated in the last 40. So these tropes have like really permeated our popular culture, as Kia has said, and our culture, and they've seeped into the political landscape and the political discourse, again, as Kia noted. And our leaders and decision makers have kind of used these ideas as fuel for their really divisive rhetoric. And, you know, it's really apparent when you want to make some change in your city or your neighborhood. You want your kids to get to school safely, or you want, say, your senior mother to get to the store safely by walking. You're automatically labeled anti-car or some outsider label. And it's a real testament. Well, it's a damning indictment on how far over the edge we are in our culture, that wanting your kids to get to school safely is considered radical. And that's something that, you know, stays with me at all times. I still can't believe we're in this space. So we have an uphill battle, to say the least, but it's also an opportunity to reframe and rehumanize people outside of the car at every level and with every single word. You know, it needs to be supported by proper communications and language that's truly reflective of the realities that everybody outside of the car faces. Again, we're all pedestrians when we walk outside of the car. And it must be done in kind of a relatable manner. So, but to better understand, you know, what we need to change and how we need to approach it, it's really important to see how we're positioned and how people outside the car are positioned, and especially in those voices of authority that the Kia just went through. So what I'm going to do right now is just give one example of language between three spaces that play out on our shared spaces. So it'll be advocacy, the authoritative voice, and the autos. So AAA, for a lack of a better term. So after an 11-year-old boy was killed by the driver of a pickup truck in a crosswalk, walking home from school with a crossing guard, you know, it got me really thinking, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where this happens? These tragedies happen, and they happen so frequently. And I just kind of started writing, and very unintentionally ended up kind of reframing this tragedy as a result of the choices. So I put together this little video, which I'm just going to put on now, and hopefully everybody can see this. And if not, let me know. Okay, so the idea of this video here was obviously to push ownership away from the vulnerable and the victims and squarely onto the shoulders of those decision makers and those city councilors and leaders who essentially created this by every one of their decisions and their choices that they've made. So these aren't accidents, these are results and results of our choices. So by no means is this a perfect communication or some sort of silver bullet when we're speaking outwardly about the need for safer and more complete streets. But what's important here is that when we communicate this extremely serious issue, we use the weight and tone that it deserves. And I think that's a really big piece that's missing, especially in the mainstream discourse, that we're not using the proper weight for the issue that it deserves. The words are extremely important, but how we frame them is just as important. So that's an advocacy piece. Let's move to our second A. We'll see how an authoritative voice approaches and communicates safety for cyclists. Now, this video is real, and I don't think I'll go through the whole thing because it's kind of long, but it's from our local police department. Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. It's about 2 minutes of that, which is absolutely ridiculous if you saw that last exchange at the intersection. There's way too much to unpack in this video, but we can see by just even that first 35 seconds, it's just classic kind of victim blaming and a true misdirection of efforts. And again, it's not just the words, it's the way the words are framed and the way it's presented that's extremely problematic. If you think about the road violence on our streets, and we heard already today, and the pain that so many families go through. And then we see something like this from an authoritative voice that's supposed to understand the gravity of the situation, maybe more than anybody. And this is the tone we're presented with. To me, it's an embarrassment to communication. It's completely disrespectful to the seriousness and the gravity that this issue really, really deserves. It'd be comical if it didn't have such severe consequences on our streets. Now, I understand not everybody's going to be a master of communications. Even though if you're in that role, you really should be, especially in that voice of power and influence. You actually should be. But that aside, not everyone can maybe produce, Madison Avenue slick content. Again, a lot of us can do that. And if you're a voice of authority, you should probably spend the resources properly to do that. So bottom line is that put those two things aside. Effective messaging can be done free and it can be done really, really well. It just takes a little effort, empathy, and understanding the landscape into which you're communicating. And those are three things that this video is completely void of. Something like this, again, it's not built to change. Absolutely not. It's built to check a box and it's built to check the wrong box. Again, to me, it's a slap in the face. But people, isn't this good advice, right? Shouldn't people on bikes wear neon jackets and not listen to music, as we've kind of heard already? Sure, that's fine, but it should not be the strategic focus of your communications or the practical approach to stopping road violence. Obviously, we all know this, but they're trying their best, right? Well, no, this content is completely unacceptable. This is not good enough, full stop. When we have so many tragedies and so much road violence every single day, if this is the counter message, this is absolutely not good enough. We have to stop telling people on bikes, how to be safe, and instead put all obviously efforts into eliminating opportunities for the drivers to be dangerous. And we all know that already. That's not news. And if you can't control the infrastructure, at least you can control the narrative and the message that can help further to get to that goal. And this video does none of that. So now to add another ingredient and our final A into this kind of grotesque recipe of road violence, it's the words, the framing of the words, and the intentional language that's used by the autos.
We've got a higher octane coursing through our veins. We've got a stronger brotherhood backing us up. We've got a duty to unleash demon, to break out, to go all out, to literally leave our mark on the streets and strips of America. This isn't just a Dodge. This isn't just a Challenger. No, this is the most technologically advanced street legal production drag car ever.
Okay, so to literally leave our mark on the streets and strips of America, that's very intentional language, and it's essentially premeditated road violence. And this is completely acceptable. This is obviously a PR event, but this is exactly what the ads say in all of them, as Kia just kind of outlined. And this is what our children, our loved ones, and our communities are up against. This is what we're up against walking to school, walking to the store, rolling to the store, moving on our bicycles. It's unbelievable. These are race-ready, street-legal monsters that are being promoted to do one thing and one thing only: speed and speed recklessly. So now, if you think back again to that ridiculous 30 seconds of police video that I showed, does that hold any weight to something like this? Absolutely not. It's an absolute joke. It's a total lack of understanding of the landscape and awareness in which you need to communicate. It's just completely void of that. It's just important to see the balance of those two messages, because these are the messages that are playing out on our streets. So again, I'm not saying what I created was perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do think is important is an example of one counterbalance to what we're being inundated with on a daily basis. So the language and how it's positioned is extremely important to the weight that it bears. The words, the framing, the tone, all of these things can help communicate the gravity of the message. There's really an opportunity to rebrand at all levels, at a point of being truly reflective of the realities, again, that highlight both the challenges and the successes that everybody outside of the car faces. Because in this space, we really don't need bravado. We just need things framed and positioned properly. This is obviously just kind of one spoke in this wheel of continual change that so many people, amazing people, have been working on for so long. And I would love to hat tip everybody that's been working in this space for so long. But in this war of the words, every one of those words and everywhere that those words sit really, really matters. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom. I felt a very visceral reaction to hearing that final advertisement you shared. And I saw the chat really lit up with a lot of comments and people so put off and so aghast at what that was trying to convey. So I know we ended on a fairly aggressive and intense note, but I really appreciate you highlighting so many different aspects of marketing and media there. We do have 20 minutes for questions, which is awesome, because there's been some really good questions in the chat. So you can continue sending questions in the Q&A. I am going to start by throwing out some of the questions that have come my way. And there was a question about the Crash Not Accident Pledge, and I will share that in the chat as well, because that's a really important website that Families for Safe Streets has started that I share with elected officials and reporters all the time. So the first question that I wanted to ask has to do with language, and it has to do with the phrase traffic violence. Someone asked, what do you think about the term traffic violence? Do you think it might be counterproductive, similar to beg buttons? The reason they're asking is because they brought it up to an engineering audience. It was perceived as passive, aggressive, and accusatory. And if you use this word, you're presuming the audience is ignorant. So I welcome anyone in the chat, in the panel, if they'd like to start and tackle and share their thoughts on this.
I can start. I just put an article I wrote about this topic in the thread because I write a lot of articles. So chances are I've written something about this exact thing. Yeah, for me, I love the term traffic violence, even as I get hate mail, literal hate mail from people about the term traffic violence. I think it underscores exactly what we're talking about. Sometimes I think it's a little inexact. I hear the argument that we should call it driver violence because that's what it is for the most part. But I think I like the term traffic violence because it underscores that we are talking about the entire transportation system, the entire traffic system. And we are naming it for the violence that it is rather than the accident or always the crime. Like one of the things that's very challenging to talk about when we talk, to suss out when we talk about traffic violence is that no, we are not saying that every single driver on the road intentionally wants to kill every pedestrian on the road. We're talking about this very gray but powerful space of negligence, not just of drivers, but of engineers, of transportation planners, of local, national, state leaders that I talked about a lot and ripped a little bit today. So I think the term violence is really important, but I can see some of the arguments against the word traffic. That said, I think it's an active conversation that I would love for us to continue having in the chat. And if you have other thoughts on this, tip me. I love op-eds. I love seeing alternative points of view on this, because what we need is strategy that works. And this is an area where a lot of different strategies exist.
Thank you. Tom or John, would you like to jump in here?
He said it amazingly. I have nothing to add.
Great. Thank you, Kia. I completely agree with you. And I can also vouch that writing op-eds for Streets blog has been a great outlet for us in New York City to get our ideas, advocacy, and campaigns across. So another question for you, Kia. Do you have any great examples of PSAs? You pointed out a lot of really bad examples. Are there any, and not bad examples? Are there any groups, and anyone else can answer this, that you think are doing a good job on education, or countries or approaches you've seen?
Well, I think one group is Tom Flood. I really think you all should follow on Twitter. I think he does a beautiful job in the advocacy space. I did want to, personally, I think that ad from Ireland is really, really good and effective and appropriately underscores the gravity of this problem. But if I can share my screen for just a sec, I saw this one in the thread and I thought it was really interesting. This is one that a locked Twitter account posted the other day and said, man, I wish this was the kind of PSA that we saw during Pedestrian Safety Month, which is a non-intuitive tip for drivers about how they should behave around crosswalks. I think if we had PSAs like this, if we had PSAs that said, this is how you request a road diet along your roads, here's what a road diet is. If we had PSAs that said, actually, here's like what you need to know about the Idaho stop and why people do it. And we talk about, I can message separately about what the Idaho stop is. If we basically use PSAs to convey information that is disrupting car culture rather than like reifying it, I think that would go a long way. I don't have a lot of examples out there because I don't know of them, but please send them my way if you do, because I would love to feature them. And I don't like that I write about negative things all the time. I like to write about more positive things. When they get sent my way, I always do.
Great. I wanted to ask about co-option of language. Here in New York City, there have been groups that have emerged talking about streets for all against the work of transportation alternatives, and you also see people posting on Twitter or starting petitions talking about how the work that we want to achieve at FSS and transportation alternatives is actually not safe streets, because specifically with regards to open streets, claims of fire department and police not able to go down a street with a fire truck, or perhaps challenges with like ADA accessibility. So they're actually saying, no, what you want for a safe street is not a safe street. I'm curious, John, if you've seen this at all in Los Angeles, and from any of you, what sort of techniques or tools you would recommend when faced with people who want to co-opt the language of the Safe Streets movement?
Yeah, I mean, I gave that awful example of the Beverly Hills Police Department creating a safe streets unit. And, I know we're amongst friends here, but amongst a lot of NIMBYists, they use safe streets as a term. And what they generally mean is, trying to regulate people of color living in their space. And navigating their spaces. And so I think there's a lot of co-option that's going on. And even on the other end, like, for example, we're working in a community where safe streets isn't about infrastructure change, but about gun violence. And this is an issue for pedestrians, especially for kids walking home or to school, which is when it comes to gang or gun violence. That is a thing that impacts their pedestrian experience. And so for them, when you say safe streets in that community, it's about reducing gun violence, and how does infrastructure, more lighting, more broader sidewalk space, more cleaner sidewalk space sort of contribute to that. And so I think it goes back to knowing your community and speaking their language and making sure it reflects that. So, safe streets, the term could be co-opted in a negative way, and it could mean vastly different things depending on what audience you're in. At least here in Los Angeles, I mean, I know, especially with the deliveries that are going on, there's been an uptick in deliveries and cars sort of parking on the sidewalk space. And so I think I haven't really seen much of pushback on safe streets in that regard, but I think municipalities starting to think about what does safe streets mean, especially when it comes to these emerging tech and scooters and all of that. So I think it's a question and a conversation we need to continue to have.
Thank you. And I see someone in the chat shares Livable California is an organization that sounds great, just like Queen Streets for All, but it actually consists of NIMBYs. And John, can you just clarify for people who might not know what you mean by NIMBY?
Oh, those, why you gotta put me on the spot? Not in my backyard. So those are the folks who usually is a very general, I'm painting very general strokes here, but people who are usually against, multi-housing in their communities, want to preserve the local culture and way that things are by preserving communities as they are and not really giving any leeway to our cities that are growing, populations that are diversifying, and our communities that are becoming less and less white.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for clarifying that, just for any folks who are not familiar with the term. Tom, I have a question that's directed at you. There's been a bunch of them, so I'm trying to sort through them. Someone said they like what you said about stopping saying that people on bikes have to be safe, but rather talking about telling car drivers how not to be dangerous. Someone said that they've brought this into their community, they've received pushback. They maintain that it should be on everyone equally to be safe on streets. This is something I hear a lot as well. Do you have any advice on how to navigate this conversation better?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the idea was we got to stop telling people on bikes and those who walk and roll how to be safe and eliminate opportunities for the driver to be dangerous. So, but the navigation process at every city, I'm sure, is a little bit different, but the commonalities are there's probably a lot of commonalities. If the question's around the city, the communication, again, and this is something that a lot of people that work in this space probably have to bite their tongue a lot, because you need to essentially stretch that olive branch a little bit when you're trying to make change at that city level. If you just go in full swinging with rhetoric, full swinging with how you're feeling and you're emotional about the changes because you need them so desperately in your community, it just doesn't go over well, and that's unfortunate. And I think the best approach is to be as relatable and find those human commonalities, which I think is important in messaging generally, and try to find those things to hold on to when you are speaking to people that may not share the same values or the same opinions of how they see how streets should be. But to that, it's that the amount of road violence that's occurring every single day, that olive branch only extends so far. And then it's time to maybe weigh in a little bit heavier. But I think trying to be as relatable as possible is a positive first step, at least, because it's so easy to get carried away and upset. And I make that mistake myself all the time, because we're all very passionate. We all want things to be better, but we're up against this massive machine that's been perpetuating this culture for 100 years of car first. I know that doesn't probably answer the question too well, but I honestly think going in as relatable as possible and trying to find those commonalities does go a long way.
Can I piggyback off of that real quick?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think Tom's underscoring a really important point that I've learned from on the ground organizers in my life, like John, which is that you really need to meet people where they are and put things in terms of the values that they have. That's like Saul Alinsky, 101 kind of stuff that I think it's really hard to do when something as personal as traffic violence, which many of us have survived or had loved ones not survive, is speaking right to us. You want to shake people by the shoulders. But there was a really fantastic study that I'll put the link to in the chat recently, that surveyed Americans across the political spectrum about what policies, transportation reforms they would support. And overwhelmingly, Americans said they would support investments that would make it possible for people to safely bike, walk, and take transit, but they would not support investments that would make it more challenging for people to drive, which I thought was a really interesting thing, because of course those, we hear that as advocates and we say they're two sides of the same coin, but it's this sign that we really need to think about. I think very few people in America would say, I want every single person to be in a car all of the time. Everyone's a pedestrian for part of their day. That's a constant message we see from PSAs. But if the more we can talk about what the person we're talking to needs and wants and values in their life, and B, what this will give to them, rather than just scolding and saying what they're going to take away, even if they are deserving of scolding, I think the further we get over time. So just one kind of thing from the world of research that I wanted to throw in there.
Real quick, a messaging point that I always use like in interviews, whenever I get a chance to speak to a large audience, especially people who drive. And this, I feel like this is a very LA thing, which is your 3-hour commute to and from work every day is viscerally connected to the bus stop you drive by, is viscerally connected to the jaywalker who walks ahead of you. And so I think the more, especially in LA, we understand we're in this one system together, I think the easier our work becomes.
Agree. Thank you, Kia. Kia, I thought you were going to say, I did see, maybe it was from the same data set, there was a partisanship breakdown there, which was very scary and very, some huge gulfs there. But that's for the topic of another panel, how safe streets or transportation policy is really splitting into a blue-red divide. That is a separate panel. A follow-up question for Tom. You noted the multinational, and Kia as well. You're doing your car ad project. We're going up against multinational companies, spending maybe billions on ads over time. Should we be pushing for PSAs? Should we be pushing out our own content if it has limited budgets? Like, how do you view this like David and Goliath approach to something that's so well funded and so ingrained in America?
Yeah, well, I don't think we really have a choice, to be totally honest. The more messaging that goes out that's using the right language, the more people that see it. I know it's unfortunate that's a bit of a long game right now, but that's the way we have to approach it, because yes, we can't match the dollars and billions of dollars spent by the autos, but honestly, I truly believe getting the language right and getting those messages out to the right people will kind of be a bit of a domino effect for others to start seeing the light. And especially if you start in a grassroots level, if you change your community's mind, your people on your street, that really helps. And if you have the right messaging, kind of going back to what we were talking about, how to connect with people, people can relate to you if you keep things very simple, very relatable, and emotional is another one of the kind of the third tool of crafting creative messages in the marketing space. But yes, it's a monumental task, but we have no choice but to do it. And I truly believe every voice does matter, no matter how far it stretches. We don't have the budget. We all are lucky now, though, to have this beautiful and also toxic social media space where we can share and amplify things. And I think we don't have a choice but to continue raising our voices and producing as much content that's more realistic and reflective of the situation outside of the car that we all experience.
Cory, can I add something also real quick?
Of course, please do.
I think a great example we can look at is tobacco, especially in California, right? We had tobacco was this still is well-moneyed industry, billions of dollars that spent tons of money in advertisement. And I remember growing up, right? It was just don't do drugs. But I think for us to really move the needle in messaging, we need to, and I said this in my presentation, we need revenue. And I think in California, it's when we started taxing tobacco, when we started bringing in public commitment and public dollars into the public sphere, and then investing that in communities to do their own education of their neighborhoods, their communities, that's when we really started to see things change. And so, I think we need a public commitment as well when it comes to this messaging that comes with significant dollars. And whether it's a congestion pricing tax or some version of the tobacco tax within transportation, I think we need to get to that point because it is a public health crisis, the same way we see with tobacco use.
Can I piggyback on that so quickly?
Yes.
One thing that is in the new transportation reauthorization bill coming out of Washington right now is that if states have more than 15% of their roadway deaths if they're vulnerable road users, they will have to devote 15% of their federal funds towards making vulnerable road users safer. And that, there's some flaws in that plan. It's not going to scoop up communities like mine in Missouri, where people are so scared to walk that we don't have as many pedestrian deaths relative to car crashes because we have lower pedestrian rates, period. But it is an example of the kind of tax, I think, that John is talking about. And I also wanted to talk about regulation a little bit. So tobacco ads are heavily regulated in America, and they have been for a long time. And in our last rounds of the Toxic Car Ads contest, we're going to be talking a little bit to Danny Harris at Transalt, our host here today, about the growing movement to regulate automotive advertising for specifically those egregious messages where they are promoting behaviors that are illegal with a tiny little line of text at the bottom that says, like, professional driver on a closed course, do not attempt. That shouldn't be legal in a lot of people's view, and hopefully we can get some action on changing that someday. So, two things.
And I think that's a really good point. And I believe, and Danny might talk to you about this, there are international comparisons in other countries which do have more of these regulations. We would not be the first. In many cases, we would, once again, the United States be the last or among the last. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left. I did share everyone's Twitter in the chat here, so people can follow and continue the conversation. If folks who are watching have more to share on their personal Twitter, I welcome you in the final 2 minutes to share links so we can follow each other and keep the conversation going. I guess, we have like about 1 minute left. I would welcome Kia, John, and Tom. What's like the big takeaway? Maybe we can end on a more uplifting note, like big takeaway that you want people to have, from this conversation, one thing you really want people to consider moving forward on this topic.
I can start. I think the big takeaway is that car culture was built and car culture can be dismantled. We can denormalize the things that we have normalized, and we might not have the same amount of money that the automotive lobby has poured into this effort over the course of centuries, but we do have people power. We do have a lot of creative, like amazing intellects behind this problem. Many of them are here today, so that's all.
I'm just going to repeat what I shared earlier, is listen to the people you represent, you profess to represent, and use their language, their desires, and their terms.
And kind of from the marketing side of things, when crafting messages that are going outward, I think the best 3 things to remember are to keep things extremely simple, keep things relatable, and if you can, make them emotional. And those are kind of the 3 pillars to develop creative that's going to be going outward facing. And every word matters, and where that word sits matters as well.
Thank you all so much. We are ending perfectly on time, and I know we have the keynote coming up, so I want to give people a little break. But Tom, Kia, John, this was really fantastic. I learned a ton. The conversation in the chat was awesome as well. Let's keep the conversation going, and I hope to see many of you in upcoming panels, and maybe some of you in New York in person for the tours that we're doing later this week. So once again, thank you a ton for everyone who participated and everyone who watched. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.